I want to welcome you all to the California State University, and I would like to welcome you to our inaugural Point Counterpoint Forum. My name is Marianne Venieres. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for International Trade and Transportation, and I'm also the Deputy Director of the MedTrans Transportation Center. I am delighted to see you all here, and I'm thrilled to see so many familiar faces in the audience. And as I met some earlier, I wondered how many of you have been here at our last 10th town hall meeting. Could I see a show of hands? Quite a few. Those of you who were here, you probably recall, or you might recall, the remarks that Dominic Moretti made, the closing remarks for our 10th annual town hall meeting. He said, we have celebrated a decade of town hall meetings, and now CITT's signature event comes to a close. The town halls have been a milestone for the industry and community outreach and communication. But he continued, this does not mean the end of the university's role for providing a platform for trade stakeholders to come together to discuss controversial issues and find solutions and agreement. Well, he was right. The CITT Policy and Steering Committee, and Dominic Moretti is a member of the Policy and Steering Committee, didn't waste much time. And we proposed to stage an educational forum in which we can explore perspectives on an issue of importance to the trade and transportation community. And we call this forum the CITT Point Counterpoint. It is important to emphasize that the dialogue be informative, non-combative, educational, and in a neutral setting. The objective is to fully understand the facts on the various perspectives of a topic and to allow the audience to further ask questions during the Q&A period. Our goal is not to end up with a winner or with a loser, as one might expect from a traditional point-counterpoint dialogue. Rather, the goal is to make the audience the winner by being much more informed about the topic. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I have to make a few recognitions. And in your program, I assume all of you received the program, you find a list of the names of our Policy and Steering Committee. At this time, I would like you to meet the committee chair, my boss, Dr. Jeet Joshi, Associate Vice President and Dean, International Continuing and Professional Education. Dean Joshi, please raise your hand. And now I would like the Policy and Steering Committee members to stand up. We would like to thank you for all the effort you have been putting in. Would you please stand up and be recognized? Thank you. I also want to recognize our global logistics specialists, our masters in global logistics, our marine terminal operations professionals, and all CSULB and USC students. This is what we're all about, so please stand up, students. Thank you for being here. A particular warm welcome goes to our friends from San Diego. 40 industry leaders have been organized by the San Diego World Trade Center Association, and they came up here, and I believe this is the third or fourth time they have been coming to our events, and I believe they receive a round of applause. Where are you? There they are. It has been a long way coming up here, and it's a long way going back later tonight, isn't it? Thank you for being here. An event like this is not possible without the generous support of our sponsors. On the back of your program and on the banner here, please note our sponsors. We're very grateful for them. It's their financial contribution together with the funds from the Metrans Transportation Center, which is our main funding source, that makes it possible for you to be here without paying admission and free parking on top of it. Ladies and gentlemen, it didn't take the Policy and Steering Committee long to identify a topic or an issue fitting for our inaugural event. The Panama Canal event expansion is on the mind of many in the logistics industry. And I guess anyone here tonight wants to know the answer to the three questions: who wins, who loses, and who decides? To help us understand and perhaps challenge some of the existing assumptions about the impact of the expanded canal on our West Coast ports, we have invited three experts, not necessarily one for each question. We have Paul Bingham, who is an economist and a consultant, Mary Brooks, an academic and behaviorist, and Todd Thomas, a realist, as he calls himself. We know that the expanded Panama Canal will be a game changer, and tonight we will learn who and how and when and where. But before we get started with our program, I want to bring to attention two things. First of all, the proceedings will be webcast. The webcast is archived and it is available for you to see on a link, I believe, that is listed on the program in about 1 week or 2 weeks. I also would like you to pull out from your program a green feedback form. Please fill that out. Tell us what you think about it, and also tell us topics that you would like to see covered in our future point-counterpoint discussions. And at this time, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to present to you the Provost and Senior Vice President of California State University, Long Beach, Dr. Donald Parra.
Thank you, Mary Ann. On behalf of President F. King Alexander, all the faculty, staff, and students of Cal State Long Beach, we welcome you to the beautiful Richard and Karen Carpenter Performing Arts Center. We are pleased to have all of you with us today as we examine an urgent and important issue that will have great impact on our region and our world. The implications clearly are global. First, I would like to recognize several elected government officials or their representatives, Port of Long Beach commissioners, and officers of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. Please hold your applause until everyone has been introduced. Congresswoman Laura Richardson, 37th District. Assemblymember Bonnie Lowenthal. Assemblymember Warren Furatani, 55th District. Chief Jim McDonnell, Long Beach Police Department. Mayor Bob Foster, City of Long Beach. From the Port of Long Beach, Commissioner Mario Cordero. Commissioner Mike Walter. Commissioner Susan Wise. Commissioner Thomas Fields. Helene Ansell, Office of State Senator Alan Lowenthal. Brian Menegino, Office of Assemblymember Warren Furatani. Captain Roger Lafere, Captain of the Port. Connie Zeibel, Office of Supervisor Don Knabe. William Orton, Office of State Senator Rod Wright. The following from the ILWU. President of the ILWU International, Robert McElrath. Ray Famolate, Vice President of the ILWU International. Ray Ortiz, Coast Committee Man. Rich Dines, President of the Southern California District Council. Joe Cortez, President of Local 13. Peter Payton, President of Local 63. Danny Miranda, President of Local 94. Luisa Gratz, President of Local 26. And Dave Ariane, the Henry Bridges Institute. Please join me in welcoming our dignitaries. MetTrans is a partnership between the University of Southern California and California State University, Long Beach. The center is funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation and Caltrans. These meetings, these town halls, have had the generous and ongoing support of the Port of Long Beach, the Port of Los Angeles, and the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. This kind of partnership, in the largest sense, has made Metrans one of the leading university transportation centers in the nation. Since the Port of Long Beach is the second busiest harbor and the largest employer in the region, clearly any impact on the Port of Long Beach is of the utmost importance to us all. The value of bringing together the major industry stakeholders in these forums cannot be overstated. The importance of these events and the research that is generated as part of these partnerships are an invaluable tool for crucial decision-making. Congratulations and thank you for all who have organized, planned, sponsored, or attended this event. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Para. Ladies and gentlemen, the mini documentary you're about to see covers the history of the Panama Canal from its earliest effort to build the canal to the current effort to expand it. The purpose of this brief documentary is to provide a framework for understanding and the significant developments occurring today in global distributions. Within this context, the video presentation will reveal the big picture regarding logistics and goods movement. Most significantly, the video will articulate the competitive challenges that lie ahead of the West Coast ports, with specific emphasis on the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. After the video, Dr. Thomas O'Brien, CITT's Director of Research, will take the microphone and serve as the moderator for discussions. And at this point, ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the video.
The year the world changed was 1914. It was the beginning of World War I. But while most of Europe was concerned and consumed by the Great War, another earth-shattering event occurred far south and west of the continent in conflict. The Panama Canal opened its locks in August of 1914. For the first time, an all-water channel bisected the Western Hemisphere. A dream of more than 400 years finally had been realized. In 1502, on his fourth voyage to the New World, Christopher Columbus sailed furiously and obsessively along the Atlantic coast of the Panamanian Isthmus, searching in vain for a central, convenient waterway to the other side of the globe. Failing this mission, Columbus settled for being the first European to conduct world trade in Panama. He exchanged a few trinkets for several solid gold chestplate shields worn by the native people. In the following decade, conquistador Vasco Balboa was standing on a summit in the Panamanian hills when he became the first European to view both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans at the same time. Emotionally overwhelmed, Balboa fell to his knees, weeping and praying in triumphant joy. During the gold rush of 1849, thousands of 49ers journeyed by boat from the American East Coast to Panama and then crossed the isthmus to board ships bound for San Francisco. Because the middle and western portions of the American frontier were still largely unsettled and often hazardous, the race to the California gold fields went fastest through Panama. In response to prospector demand, a railroad was built to cross the treacherous isthmus in the 1850s. By mid-1881, a French company began supervising a tragically ill-fated Panama Canal engineering effort. The project stalled after enduring 8 devastating years of tropical diseases and various other disasters. All funds were totally spent by 1889. During construction, at least 20,000 workers were killed by a combination of mosquito-borne malaria and yellow fever, intense rainstorms, major mudslides, and industrial accidents. For many years, American politicians had sought U.S. authority over any potential canal which would transect Central America. The Monroe Doctrine was often cited whenever American dominance in the region was discussed or asserted. Uncle Sam's machinations culminated in 1903 when President Theodore Roosevelt used gunboat diplomacy against Colombia while supporting a Panamanian separatist movement. Roosevelt's successful strategy ultimately involved purchasing American control of the abandoned French construction venture. Sadly, another 5,600 laborers perished by the time the canal was completed under American supervision in 1914.
The canal becomes an extension, thinking about the canal becomes an extension of the manifest destiny argument, that if the United States was destined to reach the Pacific, and then it did, if the United States was based in part on a growing sense of itself as a maritime power, and it was, then were the Atlantic and the Pacific and the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico and these other American-related waters to be connected with each other? So it's really the canal is a very deep idea in American consciousness. This linking of the waters, powerful the way that the linking of the continent in October 1869 was by the railroad when the railroads were completed.
Today, the trade winds billowing through Panama are once again blowing side by side with the winds of change. This time, the Panamanian people are in charge of their own destiny. They have voted overwhelmingly to expand the canal. This project will cost an estimated $5.25 billion in the process of constructing a much larger third set of locks. The new locks will significantly increase the size of ships that can traverse the canal. Current Panamax ships, meaning the maximum size ships that can transit through Panama, are limited to fewer than 4,500 TEUs, or roughly 2,250 40-foot-long containers. After the canal's expansion, super ships carrying 12,000 TEUs, or 6,000 40-foot containers, will be able to transit the canal. The repercussions of a larger Panama Canal are enormous, not only for Panama, but for most ports in the Western Hemisphere. New possibilities exist in this latest metaphorical gold rush. When the canal expansion opens for business in the centennial anniversary of 2014, much about global logistics will have changed.
If you think about it over a longer term, 40 years ago, trade was really concentrated on the East Coast ports. And so what happened in a relatively short period of time, that trade shifted to the West Coast ports with the opening up of the Asian countries. You got the tremendous growth. Now, people on the Gulf and people on East Coast ports want a little bit of the action, and the way they can get that action is, in fact, if the canal is widened.
For more than 3 decades, Southern California benefited from exponential growth in trans-Pacific trade. A massive local consumer market encouraged incoming cargo traffic, which led to both harbor and warehouse facilities expansion. These developments resulted in the San Pedro Bay emerging as a cargo destination of choice. Large vessels with huge loads could dock in the deepwater Los Angeles and Long Beach ports, while gigantic cranes rapidly moved their containers onto intermodal trucks and trains. Well-developed rail access from the harbor to the interior meant that freight bound for the Midwest was transported on double-stacked trains for the long journey across the country. After becoming the biggest and the best-equipped harbor complex with the capacity and the infrastructure to move goods onto major rail systems, the San Pedro Bay settled into a period of hegemony. However, even without the expansion of the Panama Canal, new trends are emerging that threaten to siphon away significant cargo traffic from the powerhouse ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. In the Canadian Northwest, the port of Prince Rupert has been expanding its handling capacity and enjoys an advantage by being 700 nautical miles closer to Asia. This closer proximity reduces ocean shipping time by a couple of days. Prince Rupert is served by an express Canadian rail system which can deliver goods to a central point north of the U.S. border with a direct rail shot to Chicago and Memphis. The Canadian government is fully backing and promoting Prince Rupert as part of an Asian-Pacific Gateway and Corridor initiative. This effort seeks to attract as much cargo as possible for the expanding Canadian facilities. The ports of Seattle and Tacoma are also closer to Asia and also desire to take a larger share of the cargo from the Far East that's destined for delivery by rail to the Midwest. Investments of nearly $1 billion have occurred over the past 15 years to improve the Seattle and Tacoma port infrastructures. Mexico has been discussed as a Pacific Coast competitor in the future. Among the plans in development is one to utilize the port of Lázaro Cárdenas in connection with an express rail network to transport containers directly from Mexico to Kansas City.
We know that most big shippers will look at alternatives. They went to the Four Corners approach in the mid-2000s, looking at a Pacific Northwest, a Pacific Southwest, a Gulf, and an East Coast port to try to balance their cargo flows and not just be in one port.
The expansion of the Panama Canal will allow ships to take significantly larger loads from East Asia to U.S. Gulf ports and ports on the eastern seaboard. Gulf ports in Houston, New Orleans, Mobile, and Tampa now may look more attractive to shippers who desire multiple regional concentrations of warehousing arrangements. In the South Atlantic sector, Hanjin Shipping is constructing a facility in Jacksonville, Florida, which is scheduled to open in 2013. Port complexes in Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, and Norfolk, Virginia present possibilities for expanded or additional all-water routes from East Asia to the East Coast. Of these, Virginia is best equipped to service the larger ships. Ocean routes that keep containers on vessels for the entire journey require more time, but can save handling costs compared to sail and rail combination routes. Cost reductions can amount to as much as $1,000 per container if patient shippers can afford to wait for longer delivery time frames. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is also anticipating receiving more container ships directly from China via the Panama Canal. A problem in New York is the Bayonne Bridge, which limits the height of vessels heading for container terminals in New Jersey. Efforts are underway to deepen the channel and to resolve the bridge dilemma.
So the whole idea of putting the discussion around the Panama Canal in a global context can very easily be applied to a regional scenario for the East Coast of the United States. The ability to take on larger vessels, longer berths, deeper drafts, capacity of cranes and such, it's going to resonate across the entire supply chain and have a particular impact not only on the East Coast of the United States, but the Gulf as well.
Large shippers who seek regional diversification for warehousing may decide to invest in several points of disembarkation. This strategy encourages competition, lowers costs overall, spreads risks, and provides insurance against any megaport acquiring a controlling monopoly on goods movement. Rail development is critical for any port to grow and to distribute discretionary cargo more than 400 miles from the waterfront. Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway Group owns the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, known as BNSF. Both Union Pacific and BNSF have a large stake in the West Coast intermodal system for inland cargo delivery. BNSF claims intermodal trains from the West Coast can cut as many as 9 days off delivery time to the East Coast compared to all-water Panama Canal routes.
Just because the canal gets expanded doesn't change the fact that the shortest and fastest shipping routes between Asia and the United States is via the West Coast. That's an undisputable fact. And as such, the vast majority of freight that moves between Asia and the United States has always moved through the West Coast, and it will always move through the West Coast. Now, it is a fact also that there has been a little bit of a share shift from the West Coast to the East Coast over roughly the last decade or so. But that hasn't really occurred because of the market fundamentals, which potentially could be affected by the expansion of the canal. The shortest route and the fastest route will always be via the West Coast, despite what happens with the canal.
Eastern rail networks lack the infrastructure to deliver freight on a massive scale to points west, north, and south. However, some of the recent transportation investment generating economic recovery grants, known as Stimulus Tiger grants, have planted the seeds for more intermodal rail development in the East. The recipients of these grants now seek to increase the number of double-stack trains passing through areas such as Gulfport, Mississippi, and the regional rail hubs of Memphis, Tennessee, and Birmingham, Alabama. One of the largest Tiger grants was awarded to the National Gateway Freight Rail Corridor, affecting the states of Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Maryland. A separate public-private partnership project known as the Heartland Corridor has been burrowing out the existing tunnels of Virginia, West Virginia, and Kentucky along the Norfolk Southern Railroad line. The tunnels are now tall enough to enable double-stack containers to travel on rail from the intermodal port of Virginia through the heart of the Central Appalachian Mountains to a destination point in Columbus, Ohio. A new extension for the line has been approved to continue the double-stack clearance downstate to Cincinnati. Beyond new railroad development, there are other issues that threaten the status quo in goods movement. A growing trend is the transloading market, which could push more deliveries to specialized facilities that are not limited to the usual one-size-fits-all scheme. Transloading involves shifting goods from just-arrived standard 40-foot international containers to mixed cargo 53-foot domestic containers. In Panama, canal authorities have pledged to stay competitive regarding container fees. The construction bond to expand the canal will require an annual 3.5% increase in container fees for 20 years. Panama is betting these increases will not discourage traffic nor outpace potential fee increases from West Coast competitors who must contend with environmental mitigation costs, community congestion considerations, and infrastructure improvement expenses. Because of these and other issues, Panama and the East Coast ports will try to capitalize on a perception by some shippers that West Coast ports are not business-friendly. To their credit, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach have adapted to California's most stringent emissions regulations in the nation. Through both political and economic necessity, these twin harbor giants have led the fight within the industry for cleaner air and greener ports. In the future, if potential federal mandates, such as the proposed American Power Act, begin to impose carbon caps, fees, and emissions controls, the cutting-edge work done by LA and Long Beach will be required of other U.S. ports, adding costs and complications for those competitors. Yet another concern that could tilt the balance of global logistics is the drift of large-scale manufacturing to locations such as India and Latin America. Although China and other nations in East Asia maintain a clear advantage in technology, facilities, and supplier networks, other regions could eventually start to catch up. Goods from India and South Asia can travel very efficiently through the Suez Canal for delivery to the eastern seaboard. Products originating from Latin America can use the Panama Canal while navigating routes both east and west. The harbor complex of Halifax, Nova Scotia is the closest North American port to the Suez Canal. From Nova Scotia, the express rail network across Canada and into the Midwest is being used for delivering goods to America's heartland.
But as things get a little better, service becomes predictable and reliable, meaning that you can measure the time with a stopwatch from South Asia through the Panama Canal up to Jacksonville, let's say. As all those things improve and become more predictable, the more competitive those East Coast ports are going to be, to the detriment of the West Coast.
Stakeholders in the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach have much to ponder between now and 2014. Holding on to discretionary cargo and thereby maintaining the associated jobs and economic benefits will require a concerted effort in view of the new and improved locks in Panama. Decisions are being made right now by shippers, and they are considering all of their options. Items such as capacity, efficiency, reliability, flexibility, and cost will add up to the sum total of where the employment will reside and where the growth will occur in the future. The question is whether the sun will start to set on the Southern California goods movement industry, or will the challenges of new competition conceive a new sunrise for the Western waterfront?
While I'm doing my introductory comments, I'd like to ask the speakers to come to the stage and get settled. And before I start, I do want to remind everyone to please, if you haven't already done so, turn off your cell phone or put them on vibrate. As Marianne mentioned, I'm Tom O'Brien. I'm the Director of Research for the Center for International Trade and Transportation and the Associate Director of Long Beach Programs for the MetTrans Transportation Center. We all should thank Dave Kelly and his team at Advanced Media Production in the College of Continuing and Professional Education at Cal State Long Beach for, I think, a fantastic, comprehensive, and informative video. Thank you. They do a tremendous job every year, and they've surpassed themselves this year. One other thing I want to call to your attention in the center of your program is a timeline of activities and events tied to the development of the Panama Canal and also West Coast ports with a focus on LA and Long Beach. On the website, and the URL is listed in your program, we have a more extensive timeline. We also have some additional data that I think will provide some more context for the video that you saw and the discussion that you're about to hear. After the speakers, who I'll present or I'll introduce in a moment, we're going to have an opportunity for questions, and I wanted to prepare you now because you may want to think about the questions you want to ask during the discussion. There's two options for submitting the questions. You can use the two microphones situated on either side of the room, or you can use 3x5 cards, which ushers in the aisles will be handing out during the course of the discussion. On the mic, I'm going to ask you to have to limit your introduction and your questions to 1 minute. Please, no long-winded presentations. We want to get as many questions in as possible. And you may even want to write down your question, organize your thoughts before you get to the microphone. I'll also ask for no multi-part questions, again, in the interest of getting the greatest number of people to the mic as possible. If you prefer, you can submit your questions on the 3x5 cards. If you'd like, and it would be helpful to list your name and affiliation, that would be fine, or just write down the questions. It would also be helpful if you indicate who you'd like to have answer the question. If not, it will be at my discretion, I guess, to direct the question to one of the panelists. We'll make every effort to accommodate as many questions as possible up until 8:15. I'm going to make the introduction of the speakers themselves short because the full bios are in the program. What we'll do is first we'll begin with Paul Bingham, who is the Economic Service Line Leader for the transportation consulting firm Wilbur Smith Associates. He manages the firm's economics team, analyzing the economic impacts, financial feasibility, and the costs and benefits of transportation policy and infrastructure development. One of the reasons we wanted to have Paul here is that he's worked extensively in Panama and in Egypt on Panama Canal and Suez Canal projects for the respective authorities. He's worked with ocean carriers, port authorities, federal and state metropolitan area agencies on freight-related issues. Paul's going to be talking about some of the big picture issues, sort of the hemispheric trade demand and decisions that are being made by a host of actors, including railroads, as you saw in the video, sort of giving us the macro, as it were. Following Paul is going to be Dr. Mary Brooks, who's the William A. Black Chair of Commerce at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Canada. She's had extensive experience and advised the governments of Canada, the US, Australia, as well as the European Council of Ministers of Transport in the area of liner shipping. And her area of research focuses on a number of interesting areas, including the relationship between the buyers and sellers of transportation services. And Mary's going to take a slightly different perspective than Paul, focusing a bit on the shippers and their agents as being key to the decision-making process and to helping us to understand who wins, who loses, and who decides. And then we'll conclude with Todd Thomas, who is the branch manager for the Los Angeles office of Expeditors International. He's responsible for LA operations related to transportation with direct responsibility for air and ocean export departments, as well as domestic ground, air, and sea transportation departments. He's, as Marianne said, the realist. He's going to keep us honest, talking about what happens on the ground. Perhaps most important is that Todd is a Cal State Long Beach graduate, go Beach. So he's particularly important tonight. So with that, what I'd like to do is invite Paul to come to the podium, and then we'll move directly to Mary, and then Todd, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much to Tom and to Marianne, all the organizers and sponsors of this event. It's great to be back in Long Beach after the end of the Town Hall series. And I think this is an incredibly important topic, and I'm thrilled to be able to participate, and I hope I can provide some insight. I'm also very much looking forward to the discussion we're going to have with the questions from you in the audience. The question of who wins, who loses, and who decides, I think, is one that has a lot of aspects to it. And I'm going to start with the biggest picture to try to provide some perspective. The real topic today is to talk about Southern California and the jobs in the community here. But I don't need to tell you, all of you have heard from me before, and you know painfully well that this is a globalized economy, and this part of the country plays an incredibly important role in that. And it's that context which provides some context to the expansion of the canal. You know, why is the canal expanding in the first place? Well, they had good justified reasons to do it. The expansion was a logical response by the Panamanians themselves, so much so that, as the video said, you know, they had a national referendum on this, a part of their own population saying, should we take on this debt? Should we do this? And they're right to do it. This is an expectation of long-term world trade growth that they can participate in as a winner, capturing some business associated with that, as opposed to dealing with the repercussions if they didn't expand. They have limited capacity, which before the recession they were close to reaching, and they saw themselves in a position of a declining role in world trade if they didn't expand. So from the perspective of the Panamanians, this expansion is one that's not only warranted, it's a bet on their own future and one that they hope to gain from. The opportunity for canal traffic growth is real. The recession did not end globalization, nor the growth of the world population and the economies in the long run, and trades associated with that, as you well know. Trade volumes are already growing, and they're going to continue to grow in recovery as the world continues to expand. As those economies increase through globalization, trade will once come back, hopefully not quite to the levels of the congestion we saw in the middle of the last decade here, but it will press the maritime cargo system and infrastructure capacity, and new capacity will be needed, of which this canal expansion is actually a part. If we look at, let's see if I can get this to advance here. If we look at the context of trade in the world economy, now here I'm measuring the total of world imports, so this is all trade in the world against the entire world economy. You can see the long-term trend going back 20 years was a significant increase in the share of trade in the world economy. This is a direct representation of globalization at work in the world economy. And you can see that it rose from less than 20% to over 33% right before the recession. Then we saw this dramatic, unprecedented, at least in the last century, drop in trade in a very short period of time, almost 5% in terms of how much trade meant in the world economy in the recession. Largely in part to how much more important the government spending, not directly engaged in trade, became in the recession. But the forecasts of the fundamentals are all there that it will continue on so that we return to that path that we've seen for decades, and we will continue to see that such that by 2030, we'll see world trade approaching almost 40% of the world economy. So this expectation on the part of the Panamanians or the Southern California port community that opportunities are going to continue to grow is sound. It is fundamental to the perspective in terms of how we should accept the change that's coming in the world and where we're going. Now, what does this mean for the canal in terms of its role in world trade? The potential that provides the opportunity for the canal to earn money, for jobs to be there, and to associated trade benefits to accrue, comes from lower shipping costs. As the video mentioned, these larger locks allow larger ships with lower unit costs in terms of transfer of cargo. Mary's going to go into this in more detail, I'm sure, but importantly, this expansion of the canal fundamentally does threaten Southern California market share in terms of the markets where they compete on a cost basis, qualified by many qualifiers, including service quality and time to market. If we look at what has happened in terms of the market that can be competed over, it has changed as a result of the recession. Economies and trade patterns have been affected by the recession, and the recovery path is not even. It's not even geographically, it's not even by industry. If you're in the furniture business, you're still suffering compared to if you're in consumer electronics, for example. Ultimately, the perspective that I think informs this perhaps most importantly is that we are still in the midst of an evolution and a shift in geography of sourcing and logistics practices. That's a broad statement, and it covers the entirety of economic activity, not specifically maritime trade or the movements of goods in and out of the United States. But importantly, all of that is directly affected by these bigger picture trends, and they're going to continue to reflect the export competitiveness and the development of countries with whom the U.S. trades, and also the global context of that competition. So the competitors to the United States in trade as well, both as consumers competing to bid for goods and as exporters trying to sell into end markets. And importantly, independent of the canal expansion, so whether or not the canal even existed or were to expand, these shifts in sourcing potentially threaten the Southern California market share just because of the potential changes and shifts in trade away from the traditional Trans-Pacific market that has served Southern California so well in terms of being a gateway to the entire continent for the last few decades. I'd like to illustrate that with just two graphs, the first of which shows a long-term perspective, again out almost 30 years, looking at specifically now I've grouped the United States together with Canada here, and you can see that in the blue bar at the top starting in the middle, but also the decline of Western Europe in the orange, and then this sharp rise in Asia. This is no more than confirming what you know, is this tremendous growth in the importance of Asia in the world economy over time, and the decline in the relative importance of the North American hemisphere and the mature markets in Europe, and you can translate that from a trade perspective into transatlantic trade, compared with the growth of Asia. I've also included on the bottom here Latin America and the Caribbean, which also is increasing their share of the global economy as they grow relatively faster than the United States and Canada. In 10 years, Asia overtakes Europe, and U.S. and Canada in 15 years. You know, in a few decades, the U.S. will no longer be the biggest economy in the world. If we break the world into 8 regions here, grouping together logical sets of trading partners into regions, I've got NAFTA here, the U.S., Canada, and Mexico on the left, then the other Americas, which is the entirety of the rest of the hemisphere, then Western Europe, split away from Central and Eastern Europe, called Emerging Europe here. The old traditional Trans-Pacific trade partner, our still very important trade partner of Japan, and then other Asia-Pacific, the Mideast Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Obviously, you can see the divergence here between the emerging world, the developing countries that are growing much faster. They have grown much faster over the last 20 years and are forecast to continue to grow faster. And contrast that with the much slower trade in the mature developed economies. And importantly, the role of the U.S. as part of NAFTA in the middle. In fact, from a developed country world, the U.S. actually is going to benefit from faster growth certainly than Japan, and even faster growth than Western Europe. That will be reflected in the trade patterns and the trade partners that the U.S. engages in trade with. It also provides opportunity for U.S. trade, which will be greater in growth in terms of total volumes of trade than Europe or Japan will enjoy. But really, the takeaway from this is the appropriate one that you already know. It's an Asian century, and that if we look at what's really important in terms of the economy of the world, it's Asia is becoming the center of world economic activity, the biggest area of growth, and most important then to U.S. trade. If we look at this past recession, unlike previous global recessions, such as the one that preceded that most immediately in 2001, for the first time, China led the world out of recession, not the United States economy. It wasn't the U.S. consumer going back to the stores that brought the world back into recovery last year. It was China. And in fact, that's likely to continue on in the future. You know, Asia as a whole survived the recession better than most countries. In fact, it could be argued that China never really fell into recession, rather instead that their growth significantly ratcheted back. An important aspect of the recovery in Asia is the growth of the domestic demand. That's the growth of the middle class and the consumers and the households in Asia, consuming goods that are produced in those countries or imported from overseas, instead of those economies solely focusing on growth through exports, trying to sell into the U.S. and the other developed parts of the world. But notwithstanding that, exports remain strong. The U.S. Still becomes less important over time as a trade partner to China, but trade with China and the United States still continues to grow, especially as the U.S. is able to successfully sell into China and the rest of Asia as their competitiveness continues to increase, with a big exception, and that's Japan. Japan has really passed its peak as a trading country. They're in a point where their population is actually shrinking, their workforce is shrinking. Therefore, in a very difficult period of growth going forwards, and its relevance to us in terms of being a trade partner, it's ever diminished. Even the Japanese branded goods that we buy in the stores oftentimes are actually coming from China or somewhere else in Southeast Asia. But the right perspective to have on the region and for Trans-Pacific trade is that fundamentals are strong for continued long-term regional growth from Asia with the United States. One qualifier to that is that we saw in the video is that if we look at Asia as one uniform group, it doesn't mean that the Southern California ports serve Asia in its entirety uniformly. Trade from really Singapore and points further west is more efficient to be reached the United States market through the Suez Canal, qualified by Suez canals and the functioning and the security risk for things like piracy on that trade route. But there's potential growth in that portion of Asia, which will not necessarily look to the Trans-Pacific and Southern California first as its primary trade partner. Now, I have an additional slide to describe where this cargo goes in the United States. And I think Mary's going to echo this and take you into a little more detail. Importantly, the decision makers at the end of any transportation is the derived demand for the goods themselves, so it's where they originate or where they're destined to go. Where's that buyer or that seller engaged in that economic transaction? And for better or worse, in the United States, most of the population and economic activity is still in the East. Here I've just very broadly circled about 2/3 of the population and the scope in the eastern part of the United States, and understanding that in the end makes a big important factor in terms of where the decisions of routing go and the decisions of the intermediaries that decide how to serve this end market, and the potential for growth going forwards for growth faster in the southern parts of the United States than in the north. But that actually also still favors a maintenance of this 2/3, 1/3 share roughly. I think there's other ways to look at this. But this includes ultimately influencing where the decisions are made about where cargo goes. But the good news for Southern California is most all of these consumers, whether they're in the East or the West, they don't care how the cargo gets to them. They really don't care. If you go into the store shelf, you're not thinking, gee, I'm going to buy this product whether or not it was handled by the Panama Canal or Southern California ports. Well, the exception is in this audience, we might care. But outside of this, for most of the U.S. population, they wouldn't give it a second thought, and they really don't care. So ultimately, it comes down to service, quality, and price. Is the good on that store shelf at all in the first place? Is it there at the lowest price? Is it there in a perfect condition? That's what's going to matter to them. And all through the supply chain that feeds that ultimate demand and those decisions. Similarly, on the exporter side, when exporters are looking to get goods overseas, they want to get it there on time and in perfect condition and not damaged anyway. Then that routing decision comes down to the competitiveness within the industry. It's the industry talking to itself in terms of how those decisions are made to serve these ultimate consumers, these ultimate clients that ultimately make those decisions. Final slide here is that the decision-making that goes on, as the video mentioned, there are already decisions being made today. In fact, there are already decisions that have been made in the past that are going to decide the winners and losers in the future. We can identify some winners very clearly. I think we can argue quite strongly that the Panamanians are going to be winners from this in the end, and no matter how fast the payback is, that's somewhat open to question. But ultimately, they will be winners from capturing some additional world trade. That's not necessarily U.S. trade. It may be trade of South America with Asia, for example. They serve a broader market than just the United States. Potential losers, I think the biggest group of losers are those that don't prepare, don't understand the changes that are work, and therefore are going to be reactive after the expansion has happened. Those, I am sure, will be the losers because other competitors will get an advantage on them and take away some of their business. And that extends to this port community if they're not paying attention to the issues. But you, by being here tonight, prove that you're here in advance of the opening of the expansion and show your interest to not get caught flat-footed after the changes follow once the canal locks have expanded. All of the representatives and participants in the supply chain, the shippers, the carriers, the infrastructure providers, they are all decision makers. They, within their sphere of influence and their control, are going to make decisions that are going to affect the competitiveness of the canal route versus the intermodal route served through the gateways on the West Coast and the San Pedro Bay. What these decision makers in the industry don't know yet, ultimately, is what will be the competitive cost and the service performance of the entire supply chain through the new expanded locks in the canal versus a future system of intermodal and port performance made possible by investments on the part of the port community, by government agencies, and by the railroads in trying to serve those same competitive end markets. There's a lot of factors that will affect this decision-making, and those include, as I'd mentioned, the total delivered cost for the goods, but also port and rail competition. They're not necessarily attempting to maximize the cargo volumes. They're attempting to maximize profits for their shareholders, whether it's somebody that owns stock in the UP or Warren Buffett, or somebody that's existing in a port community. There are also, as mentioned in the video, remaining impediments to use of East and Gulf Coast ports. The removal or the expansion of the canal locks removes a bottleneck that exists in that supply chain, but it doesn't instantly turn the channel depths into all the East Coast ports and to match what you have here in San Pedro. Nor does it deal with the bridge clearance at the Bayonne Bridge or many of the landside infrastructure constraints that still exist in Atlantic Coast ports and trying to serve some of those same competitive end markets. So I don't want people to over-attribute the expansion of the canal in terms of improving those supply chains. There's a lot of other investments that are required in that eastern part of the country, in the Gulf and the Atlantic coast, to really facilitate and take full advantage of that. And it's why the Panamanians have been trying very hard to encourage all of that in that part of the country for a long time, because they realize their market potential is limited if all these add-on, follow-on infrastructure and operating improvements don't come following the expansion of the locks. Now, lastly, all of this should be put in the context of other factors at work. Some of those were touched on in the video, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of them more, but those include other factors that will affect trade demand and the choices of trade routes and sourcing in the world economy. Those include environmental issues, energy supply and fuel prices, security issues, safety issues, labor issues, and infrastructure factors, all that from the context of this route competition and the winners and losers and the decisions to be made really translate into cost and service quality that affects those ultimate decision makers that are going to the stores or that are trying to export their goods. Some of this may benefit Southern California ports. You've been well aware of a lot of these issues for the long time. You're on the leading edge of trying to come up with innovative solutions to address a lot of them. And ultimately, that may give an advantage to this region as other ports try to catch up. And I think that we've seen some movements in the industry already, and in some of those customers like Walmart and others that are adopting sustainability factors as a procurement decision in their purchase of transportation services that may give some advantage back to Southern California in the future. So that concludes my prepared remarks. I want to thank you, and I look forward to participating in the panel and your questions and answers. Thank you very much.
As Mary comes to the table, I want to make sure the volunteers along the aisles are starting to pass out the 3x5 cards. It's also come to my attention that since we started, we've been joined by Congresswoman Laura Richardson from the 37th Congressional District. Congresswoman, are you here? Thank you for joining us. I'd like to turn over to Dr. Mary Brooks now.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm absolutely delighted to come back to Long Beach again And I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, so thank you. And I'm also going to advise Mary Ann that I went and left the timer I promised you I was going to have underneath my seat. So I'm counting on you to wind me up if I run over time. And of course, there we go. I wanted to start by sharing with you my point of view so that you can see where I'm coming from before I talk about how I got here. I believe very passionately that this decision will be made by the port's customer's customer. It's well recognized that the battle for global cargo moves, large cargo interests, their agents and shipping lines have more power and ports have less. I'm having a little trouble with the remote here. There we go. The market today is not the same as the market when Panama made its investment decision, and I believe that it's very likely that the market will have changed again by the time the expanded canal opens. We're getting about 1 out of every 3 out of this. No? There we go. The context has changed. I believe that the world has switched from port competition to route competition. Traditionally, ports competed in a limited hinterland, and today ports are part of a complex supply chain that pits alternative origin and destination routes against each other. This has happened over the last 20 years, and we've seen complex networks develop with fewer, more powerful players like the shipping lines, but we've also seen stakeholders with interests in such things as environmental issues exert greater control. We've had integration along the supply chains from within the cargo movement industry. We've had the rise of civil society and their ability to organize via the internet. And then, of course, we've had an enhanced interest in security and sustainability. These have changed the world to some extent, and the world is not changing. There we go. Oh, I don't even know why it's going back now. Oh, there we go. The cargo interest has become more powerful. We've had telecom deregulation and a cheap internet. And that has meant that buyer and supplier communication is much easier. They know how to find each other, and that has meant there's been more global trade. We've also had security management go global. And the end result, though, is that shipping lines have made massive investments. And some of those massive investments have been made because they believe that the larger ships will give them a lower cost per slot. The problem is they aren't necessarily filling those slots. And so they're chasing less cargo than they really need to have to be truly successful. And as a result, there's been quite a decline in transport costs, and cargo has had the benefit of that. The velocity of cargo has become a huge issue. What we've had is essentially high-value product chains are now engaged in time-based competition. And I'm going to come back to this concept of time-based competition throughout my remarks because I believe that this is the area that everybody's looking for benefits, not just in terms of door-to-door time, but in terms of the final cost of that time. All water routes, like going through the Panama Canal to the East Coast, do reduce transport costs for cost-sensitive customers. The other advantage of an all-water route is that it has a lower environmental impact. And I'm going to come back to that later. So you're competing against a route which has cost and environmental benefits, but not time benefits. And so what we have now is supply chain decisions are increasingly made on service volatility, and I'm going to call that the standard deviation of time, around price, transit time, and frequency, And I want to come back to the concept of reliability. So what does all of this mean? I really want to talk about the specifics of today and the specifics of now. And I'm going to put back up a chart that reflects what Paul was talking about a little earlier. You will notice that the population of the United States has kind of got this 25-75 split. And imports go to where the population is. On the export side, if we can get exports up, on the export side, we have 5 different large markets generating the majority of exports. And as you see, the West Coast ports, Seattle-Tacoma area, the Oakland-San Francisco area, and the San Pedro Bay area all attract their own captured exports, we could say. The East Coast, number 4, has 4 major sources of cargo, and that would naturally go there. The one that is being fought over are the 5 in the middle. That's what everybody wants to have as a piece of the pie that they have. Who gets this business now? Well, in 2008, you can see that the San Pedro Bay ports got more than 1/3 of the total U.S. traffic. This means that the ports of Southern California, by all measures, have been punching above their weight. In other words, you've gotten the business. The question is are you going to lose it? It's not, are you going to get more? It's, are you going to maintain your share? The Burlington Northern Santa Fe in the video indicated that what you've got going for you is a fantastic ocean rail connection, and that combination is faster to market. So you're close to Asia, it's fast to market, but it is yours to lose. So my assessment at this point in time is who has won? Well, the U.S. consumer retail has won. West Coast ports and its employees have won. The railways like Burlington Northern and the Union Pacific, and the West Coast economy with jobs. Who has lost? East Coast ports and drivers of cars on California highways. Okay, and we are not getting anything out of this now. Who decided? Those who pay the freight. That's like Todd, right? Todd decides. Your customers decide. We're back to the ports, customers now, are we? Okay. I'd like to explain what the future might hold. Well, there we go. Slower ocean schedules. Everybody's heard shipping lines are slowing down. And why are they slowing down? Well, if you're investing in a 12,000 TEU ship, take a look at your fuel costs. Those fuel costs have been ratcheting up. And as you go faster and faster, the costs for the largest ships grows exponentially compared with the cost of the smaller ones. So, of course, you made the investment as a ship owner in a ship so that you could have slot cost savings per TEU, and now the fuel costs are eroding them. So you slow down. Well, if you slow down without thinking about the impact on your customer, the impact is your customers are unhappy, and they're ready to skewer you. Why? Because they don't see that you should be slowing down if they have an expectation of time to market. This may not be the route that I should have picked, but this was the easy table because the Dutch have taken a look at the impact between sailing time, speed, and days in service, and you can see that the difference between the numbers in the bottom row, if we can get my little assessment up there, is a 25% increase in the time to market on the shipping side. So if you're a customer who's worried about inventory carrying costs and time to market, the shipping line decision to unilaterally slow down to save fuel costs has had an impact you weren't expecting. So, just because the shipping line thinks that it's going to save money, what is it concerned about? Well, I've got another example here, and that is the cost of moving a box from China to Germany. In the top one, which is the ship owner's view of his costs, you'll see that the bunker is more than 56% of his total costs, which is why he's concerned about slowing down. In the bottom one, which is the cargo owner's point of view, you can see that the carrying cost is added to that, and all of a sudden that bunker cost the ship owner faces is considerably smaller. So the diagram on the bottom, or the pie chart on the bottom, includes the costs to the cargo owner in addition to the costs to the ship owner. This helps us understand why inventory carrying costs have become so important to the cargo owner and why he's so concerned about time. If I take a look at the transit times, and this is transit times alone and does not include the land time to market, but just the port-to-port time, you can see the transit time and see where that break point is. And Paul had mentioned it was somewhere around Singapore. Most of the studies say that it's actually closer to Thailand. The problem we have is that the shipping line doesn't always start in Thailand. If he started in Thailand naturally, he'd go through Suez. But if he starts in China, So if we take a look at where companies compete, I'll never get my boxes up here. So much for animated PowerPoints, right? If we take a look at the first one, the cargo that starts in India is never going to come to Los Angeles or Long Beach. Down at the bottom here, you can see that it's just not competitive from a time time point of view. However, for the others, the Vancouver, Los Angeles, Long Beach type of combination is all much better. And so what we can see is that you shouldn't really be worried if you're thinking to attract the time-based market. The other point that's important here is carrier reliability. I can't imagine, most cargo owners work in industries where they talk Six Sigma and, one default in a million. And the best carrier schedule out there, and they're proud of it, is 69% reliability. I mean, this just doesn't cut it. I'm really sorry. So we have schedule reliability up here, and you can see that the majority of shipping lines can't even call on a port half the time they're scheduled. I mean, so we really have a real problem here with carrier reliability. And what does that mean? I have to tell you, if I'm a cargo owner, I want reliability statistics published. And I want the port to do it. Because I want to know who's going to serve my cargo well. And the carrier who fixes the reliability problem is going to attract the cargo because they will reduce the cargo's investment in safety stock. Now, everybody's been talking about the environment. What does the environment? Will carbon play a role in these decisions? Well, we can see that shipping is probably, the container ship is the lowest impact carbon in terms of carbon emissions per ton kilometer of cargo carried. And if we take a look at the other component of this, which is cents per ton mile, and try and put a value on those external costs in the bottom, road safety, congestion, noise, GHG, particulate matter, add it all up, it runs to about 25% at the maximum of the cost we could add on. So let's just assume for a minute If we took the cost of getting a product to market, a television, less than 2%, whiskey, this is my favorite, I'm a whiskey drinker, whiskey, less than 1% of the cost is transport. Beer, 1%, I'll switch to whiskey. Coffee, 1%. If I were to take a look at those and add an environmental surcharge of 25%, I still haven't made a significant impact on a customer making a decision to switch to an alternate product. I don't believe that we're going to find that we can pull climate change agenda through surcharges because it doesn't have a big enough impact at retail. It's just something we have to do because it's the right thing to do. So if we get down to the real impact issue, the cargo owner faces 3 costs: in-house costs, outsourced costs, and inventory carrying costs. And the transport cost that I have up above doesn't include those time costs, so you want to know what the impact is going to be. The impact is from a point of view of which port is best. Let's take an example. I've got the example here from Garland Chow's work out of UBC. He analyzed several trade routes. I've just picked Shanghai to Chicago or Toronto, because he investigated both, for the apparel industry. He found that non-transportation costs, i.e. inventory carrying costs and the like, accounted from 52% to 67% of the total delivered cost. They arise with the value of the commodity. Reliability is a key. And if I take a look at the exact numbers, if I can get the table up, he did it at Vancouver. The best case scenario, Vancouver's a little more pricey than Long Beach or LA, and Halifax is the most expensive. Worst case scenario, Long Beach comes up, LA Long Beach comes up looking the worst on the inventory carrying costs. What does this tell me? This tells me there's a huge spread here. It tells me that when LA is good, Long Beach is good, is very, very good, and when it's bad, it's horrid. Sorry, little nursery rhyme there. So the gap is small between Vancouver and Long Beach. It's fragile. It won't take much to tip the balance. So Vancouver could be a serious competitor. Apparel is very low value. So for higher value goods, that unreliability problem, that gap between large and small, that's the thing that needs to be focused on. So concluding thoughts, ports aren't as powerful as they had been once. You need to be an attractive routing option. You need to focus on responsiveness, efficient goods transfer. You need to align your interests within the community. That means everyone in the community needs to be pulling in the same direction. The global crisis has forced everybody to re-examine their practices. They haven't finished doing the restructuring they're going to do. You have time to keep the business. So my assessment for the future, in terms of who wins, who loses, and who decides, who will win? Again, the U.S. consumer at retail, ports and their employees that focus on serving the customer well, the railways and the distribution companies that are connected well to ports. Who will lose? Who will lose? Who will lose? The U.S. consumer, who will lose? Complacent ports. I think Paul already mentioned this. Those who are complacent don't serve their customer well. And of course, again, the drivers of cars near successful ports. And finally, I'm just going to give up on this. Who decides? Who decides? Those who pay for the freight and their agents. He or she who wants the business to align the community. You decide. It's your business to lose. You work together. You make it happen. You will win. Thank you.
I spent a lot of time here as an undergraduate, and it just may be the first time anyone actually cares what I might say. So, as I listened to the two distinguished speakers here earlier, I thought to myself, I wish I was going first. So I commend you both on the research and your perspectives and the points made. I myself am a logistics professional, and as Marianne said, was brought here to hopefully give the realistic or the realist point of view, and I work in the industry day in and day out here in LA. I'm a little biased towards LA, and that may come out in my presentation, but I think we all might be in the room here. So to start here, a pretty common question we've all heard before, but the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Okay, I think it was said well by the individual representing the rail lines in the video, but this isn't going to change. Moving from Asia to the U.S., L.A. Long Beach is always going to be a viable, relevant port. Okay, but we're here to discuss more than that. So, the importer's challenge. The importer's challenge never changes. They have to consider how to deliver their goods to the stores or their distribution centers and balance the total costs, as Mary said, the total cost and the time value of money, the transit time, all of the aspects that they deal with day in and day out. Some of the aspects that become particularly important are the capabilities of their trading partners. I think it's important for us to realize as global trade moves across, into other areas, not just China, we all focus, and we tend to focus on China being a very large trading partner. Paul made a good comment on Japan being less and less relevant today. The reality is the steamship lines, the importers, they follow the best cost structure that's out there. So as China or any other manufacturing point becomes less effective, less cost effective for the importing community, they will move. So when you look at it from the perspective of the importing community, they have to balance where the cargo is, where they're going to manufacture it, the supply chain relative to where they're going to locate their manufacturing, and all of the services and infrastructure that's related to bringing that cargo from, whether it's China, Cambodia, Vietnam. I can tell you from my perspective, we see a huge surge of cargo coming out of Vietnam. What I haven't heard is that there's going to be a direct service call from Vietnam transiting the Panama Canal post-2014. Okay? When you're the importer, do you have the time? I think each of us have talked about it as well as the video, but the time value of money is very important when considering where to route the cargo, the discretionary cargo. Just looking at a sailing schedule from Hanjin Shipping Line, and this does not take slow steaming into account because the transit times have been extended from what they once were a year and a half ago. But if you look at the transit time from Busan to Savannah, you're looking at 21 days. At best, that's 7 days longer than getting your cargo in and through Long Beach, Los Angeles harbors. Right? Does the importing community have enough time to spend that 7 days? And right now, money is cheap, but ultimately it may not be, and the time value of money is going to come into play when deciding how to route their cargo. Another thing from my perspective is when the Panama Canal opens, it's easy for importers to say when they plan to utilize this new avenue, we're going to plan earlier. We're going to issue our POs earlier. We're going to have our manufacturers ship earlier. My experience is that's much easier said than done. Cargo, when cargo gets to the port in Asia and it's ready to go, it's typically ready to ship as quickly as possible and get to the importer as fast as they possibly can get it there. So one of the things I worked with our corporate office to gather some data, and this was an interesting aspect. As we look towards 2014 and what's going to happen, we looked at how much cargo is actually going to the East Coast. And, I only have 5 minutes left. I got to be quick. So The East Coast right now, 7,000 TEUs a week are transiting via rail to the East Coast. Important to separate Midwest from the East Coast. If you take 7,000, that's only 2 sailings a week. And I would gather that those 7,000 containers in a week, they're not going via rail because they have a lot of extra time to get to the East Coast. Okay. When you look at the Midwest, you have 4 distinct areas: Illinois, Chicago area, Texas, Ohio Valley, Tennessee, Memphis. All of this is efficiently serviced by LA Long Beach via rail, right? And when we look at the pricing structure based on today's pricing, even if you took it through a viable Houston port, moving it up to Chicago area, you wouldn't necessarily see a cost savings. So have we already seen the shift? As mentioned earlier in the video, back to 2002, we've steadily seen cargo that's been destined to the East Coast shift that way. Starting back in 2000, it was 15-16%, and ending in 2009, getting close to 30%. So there's been a significant shift that way already. Will it continue? As Paul mentioned, before the recession, the Panama Canal was nearing capacity. What you saw, if you look at the vessel strings through the Panama Canal, from 2000 to 2008, it actually reduced a string. So if the discretionary cargo was capable of going to the East Coast, couldn't you argue that the strings would increase? All right, so who's coming to the party? As I researched this topic, every port on the East Coast has a memorandum of understanding with Panama. They all want to come to the party, and to varying degrees, they're ready to. The one you're going to hear first, or we already heard about a number of times, is the Port of Jacksonville. Hanjin Steamship Line is currently building a new terminal there, capable of servicing the largest vessels. But I found an interesting fact sheet here on their website when I was researching. If you look back from 2002, when Walmart put in 1 million square feet of distribution facilities, all the way up until 2009, it's a lot of importers have moved there. Picture of the port, they do have a number of vessels alongside. Looks like a viable port. The total in that 10-year period was 10 million square feet of distribution space. Seems like a large number. Now, if you look at Houston arguably, to me, stands to have the biggest gain. 4th largest city in the U.S., large port complex today, handling large break bulk items, deep water ships, a lot of land. All right. If you look, let me back up one. On the left there, the picture is one of their marketing materials from their website, touting the industrial zone, which has an abundance of green land there. So my comment here is, if you build it, they might come. But today, versus what we see out there in LA Long Beach, it's not yet developed. Some have taken the initiative and put distribution facilities there, Walmart and Home Depot being 2 of the largest. There's not very many Walmarts and Home Depots who can have multiple large DCs in 4 corners of the U.S., right? There's very few of those. Okay? So, we also heard about Prince Rupert. From my perspective, Prince Rupert is a very nice port, has a lot of interesting options, especially if you're in the Midwest. The ability to service anything on the East Coast is limited. Service anything on the West Coast doesn't make sense. And the first time the first time anyone has a customer experience Revenue Canada open and do an intensive exam on their cargo, they pretty much want to avoid that option going forward. So, where does that leave us? Sometimes size does matter. I can't help but point out the LA Long Beach Port Complex, the San Pedro Bay, has made the most investments, has the most infrastructure, has the most dedicated workforce to the industry. Just because the Panama Canal is going to be widened does not make this irrelevant. Okay? To be fair, the picture was from Long Beach, but I took the marketing material off of LA's site because they had some nice factoids. I got to share the love, right? They had some nice factoids here, and the one I want to point out is they definitely, as well as Long Beach, are marketing to their ability to service the interior of the U.S. at a very fast and efficient pace, right? But the one that really jumped out at me when you think back to the Jacksonville, the 10 million square feet of warehousing space, well, let me tell you, we have 660 million square feet of warehousing space currently in the LA basin, ready to be servicing the importing community. It's a big difference. So I'll close it up here. When asked to look at who wins, who loses, and who decides, I had to put it in two buckets. Short term, I think the steamship lines win. And as I researched the topic, what I found is that very quickly the steamship lines will take the opportunity to change some of their smaller vessels and operate larger vessels at a more cost-efficient basis, still servicing the same number of containers, yet lowering their per-container expense. Right? They may even reduce their strings. They don't need as many ships to go through to service the same number of containers. So they win immediately. Who loses? Panama. The budget for the widening started at just over $3 billion. As of right now, they're touting it at just over $5 billion, and we're not done. We have 3 more years. The amount of money it's going to take to service the debt in the short term makes Panama and its citizens the losers. Who decides? In the short term, the steamship lines decide. It's going to be easy for them to take advantage of the economic opportunity. Long term, 2020 and beyond, I think Panama does win. Ultimately, they had no choice, really. They couldn't allow their canal to continue to decay and service vessels that were no longer being manufactured. No one's going to make a smaller ship in the future, right? Who loses? Possibly. I should have put possibly up here, the West Coast ports. There is a threat, and we're all here because of it. And who decides? At the end of the day, as they always do, once the infrastructure is built, once there's options, once there's viable options via rail and interior delivery from the East Coast and Gulf Coast ports, the beneficial cargo will ultimately decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, Mary, and Todd, for 3 really interesting presentations. We see some points of convergence, some areas of potential discussion that might follow. As people are moving to the microphones, and if you have 3x5 cards to submit with questions, you have volunteers along the aisles. Let me ask a couple of preliminary questions from those that were submitted already this evening. And the first question I have is directed for Todd. You mentioned Walmart and Home Depot choosing Houston, Galveston area for operations. And the question is, if there's any relationship at all between the proposed expansion of the Panama Canal and the decision to locate operations in the Houston, Galveston area? Oh, can we check, make sure the lavaliers are working?
Do I need to come up? There we go. I think there may be ultimately a benefit for Walmart, Home Depot, and any of the other large retailers, large importers that are going to utilize the Houston option. I think, as I stated, Houston probably stands to benefit the most. Close to the population, good port, lots of space, lots of land. But what I think as it relates to this question is, when did Walmart and Home Depot make that decision to go there? And my impression is that they made that decision to go there as a risk diversification strategy prior to Panama deciding to widen the canal. So they wanted to go there in order to spread their risk out, the Four Corners approach, before the Panama Canal widening was actually a discussion point.
Paul or Mary, anything to add to that?
Well, when people always talk about companies moving head offices or moving major distribution centers, one of the questions I always want an answer to is did the new locale buy the business? I mean, why would Boeing move its headquarters to Chicago from Seattle, for example? Well, they were induced. So sometimes the decision is made on business grounds and has really very little to do with other aspects of it. So it's not just, the decisions that you make because you want to have a distribution center in an area or you want to diversify your risk. It might also be that you've been induced to make a move.
I'm going to take a question from the card because it's a clarification question and probably would benefit the audience, and maybe I'll direct it to Paul. Who's paying for the canal? The government, private investors?
Well, in the short run, the cash has got to be fronted by somebody other than the users, and that's the combination of retained earnings, if you will, from the Panama Canal Authority themselves, and then the lenders, who are primarily Asian banks that have put up the capital. They've engaged in debt financing with the Panamanians under terms which require repayment on a certain schedule, and part of that is through the increases in the toll revenues. Ultimately, those that are going to pay for this will not be the U.S. taxpayers like the original canal or the Panamanian taxpayers, except that they've implicitly guaranteed the debt. It's going to be the users through the payment of tolls. So it's the steamship lines that'll make the payments, but ultimately it's the shippers themselves who are paying through those, as exists today, toll surcharges or tolls that are embedded in the rates that they're paying. So ultimately it's any cargo that moves through the canal is going to be paying for that expanded set of locks.
Good, thank you. Let's start with a question here, and then I'll move over to the...
Hello, my name is Paul Sanchez. I'm a executive board member, 38192, International Longshore and Warehouse Union, Long Beach, Los Angeles Harbors. This is directed to the panel. I do believe you folks have done your homework, and I'm highly impressed with your presentation. And I'm kind of hoping to see Brother Dominic Moretti here as well, but for some reason you folks chose not to have him on your dais. But this man, I discussed with him a long time ago, this certain aspect of this thing. I think you're overseeing a little bit about infrastructure. I understand the cargo coming to the docks going to rails, but trains do not do very well on the highways. Aren't you people surpassing the concept of intermodal travel as well? Because sooner or later, it doesn't matter whether if the cargo goes to the East Coast or West Coast, it's going to have to go on the streets. And if we do not do something about rebuilding the infrastructure, which has fallen down to the last periods of time, then we're leaving ourselves in for a very, very wide open margin of other ways that other people can viably use or create new businesses for transferring cargo.
Thank you. Someone want to take...
Yeah, I think I'll jump in. I acknowledge, you're exactly right. There is significant risk to this region from potential problems in terms of use of the road network to access the intermodal rail yards. The opposition, the difficulty that we're having with ICTF or SCIG getting to expand or to be built is an example of the challenge faced with terminal development on the land side. And that potentially is a capacity limitation for the ports. You can build out all the space you want on the terminals and have the berths dredged as far as you need them, or have them extended or add acreage. If you can't get that cargo out of the basin to those end markets, that's absolutely a real challenge to the competitiveness of the port. And from a shipper perspective on that discretionary cargo, we've seen past examples with the congestion you had in 2004 into 2005 as an example of what happens when you have congestion. You can see cargo diversion away from the region. But having said that, there's a lot of planning efforts underway. I think the public officials here know, and you're all aware of it, for a whole suite of plans to try to do things such as improve the 710 and deal with things like Alameda Corridor 2 and find other ways to get that cargo out of the basin and onto those end markets. So it's being addressed, though, with an enormous number of challenges, some of which are environmental, some of which are planning, some of which are legal, all of which provide impetus for this community to stand up and say, hey, we recognize this is one of the critical pieces of the planning to make it happen so that the port can continue to be competitive, getting that cargo out of the basin.
Thank you. Question on this side, please.
Good evening. Hugh Constant, World Trade Center, San Diego. I think that the vision so far has been talking about the Panama Canal over the next 20 years. But with an investment like this, perhaps we should be looking at the next 100 years. Africa has been described as perhaps the last frontier. It's already a major source for commodities and other resources, and in the future it'll become the low-cost production center. Do you think that this will be a benefit for the West Coast ports?
Is your question directed at anyone in particular or no?
No.
I'll take it.
Todd?
I think just by the nature of the geography, if cargo was coming from Africa, it would go to the East Coast. Similar to how the Asia cargo is coming to the West Coast, so it would be a much more competitive situation on all of the East Coast ports. I don't foresee ships transiting the Panama Canal to bring cargo to the West Coast, especially in light of the population being heavily concentrated on the East.
Okay. I have a question from the audience on the card. This one is directed to Mary Brooks. Mary, you made reference to the environmental question, something that was brought up in the video. And the question is, what interest or what steps are you seeing being made in the international community outside the U.S. That would suggest that other countries, other ports, are buying into the notion of going green?
Actually, the move towards greening of ports is being felt in many places. Most ports have come to the conclusion that, from their own investigations, that to not be environmentally friendly is not an option. They believe that although greening does not confer a competitive advantage, not being green will be a disadvantage. So they feel that it's something they have to do. One of the things that I'm disheartened by is the fact that the international shipping industry has not moved as quickly as it might move in terms of dealing with pollution from ships. This is a problem. The airline industry certainly was moving very quickly in advance of the Copenhagen framework, and the shipping industry could not seem to get agreement on anything more than what they've already achieved through the IMO in terms of sulfur control areas. So, but I think ports definitely have to go down the environmental management road, and quite a few ports in North America have made, I think, fairly significant contributions in this area.
Thank you. Take a question over here from this gentleman.
My name is Steve Trojanich, and I belong to the ILWU. And my question is this. What factors determine that widespread you spoke of in cargo handling efficiency? For LA Long Beach, it was 251 in the bottom end and 500 and some odd number in the top end. That widespread compared to Vancouver was pretty lengthy, I imagine. Now, my second part of my question is if it involves bottlenecks, where are the bottlenecks? Do they surface here at the port itself, or are there points along the supply chain?
Because this is those calculations were a door-to-door calculation. In other words, the total cost, and it was not just the cost of transportation, but it was also the inventory carrying cost. The variability between the lowest cost and the highest cost was related to the unreliability of the system as a whole. In other words, there was something wrong in the whole routing. So when you took a look at those numbers, you noticed that the best case scenarios for that move, Shanghai to Chicago, was the LA Long Beach route. But it was also the worst case, which means it has the broadest spread, which means it has the most unreliability. So if I was a cargo owner and I looked at that chart, I would say, well, on the other hand, Halifax has the most expensive at the bottom end, but the least expensive at the top. Maybe I should put a small bit of my cargo through there because it's more a reliable route. And so it would explain why some ports are get the volume of cargo, the biggest volume. LA Long Beach gets the biggest volume, but we know that some companies send. Halifax gets a lot of, I'll give 10% of my cargo to you because you're more reliable. Well, why is Halifax so reliable? Because it's got so much capacity and it's not got a lot of volume. You know, when you're not congested and you're not busy, you can be more reliable. So it's the reliability that causes that variability. And that means that you need to take a look at where are the bottlenecks, and those are, to go back to the previous question from this side of the room, those bottlenecks are almost all landside. The International Transport Forum of the OECD did a very large look at port competition and port problems a few years ago, and their major conclusion was that port issues are landside. It is all about inland congestion. It is all about how you manage the cargo flow outside the port boundaries and into the community. And if you go further to the investment in Prince Rupert is a 100% two-rail direct to Chicago, and it's got a sole purpose in mind because other ports were showing they couldn't handle cargo as quickly, and so that was the impetus for that investment.
Mary, from the audience on the card, I think it's related. What role does productivity play in terms of landside bottlenecks?
You can have gate congestion being a particularly difficult thing for ports. Productivity, lots of great cargo handling technologies out there. That's not the one that I'm hearing as being the big issue at the ports. I'm hearing that ports are working on their productivity and working hard to maintain that. So I'm not sure that that's the thing I would be most concerned about. I've done a study just recently on port performance and in U.S. ports, and I have to say that the number one problem for U.S. ports is gate congestion. And that's a bottleneck. So, yeah.
Dr. Moretti on this mic.
Thank you, Tom. I have a question on transshipping in the Panama Canal, and this is for Mr. Bingham. It has been said that Panama is considering the creation of a megaport at the western entrance of the canal. This proposed megaport would allow post-Panamax ships to offload there, thus increasing transshipped cargo. The question, Mr. Bingham, is what role do you see transshipping playing in Panama Canal trade, and how might transshipping affect our local ports?
Well, transshipping is something that's not going to wait for the expansion of the canal to be complete, but it certainly may be accelerated by it if the carriers, in doing their route analysis of where they offer their services, determine that that's advantageous to them. Where it already exists, for example, on the other side of the canal for a decade, they've had the Manzanillo International Terminal, which captures some north-south trade intersecting with east-west trade as a transshipment point. And it's a well-established operational practice around the world in places like Algeciras or some places like Salalah in the Middle East or on and on. You can find the economics of global liner shipping are such that transshipment makes sense in sort of an extended hub-spoke concept in terms of bringing the larger ships into those transshipment ports with the efficiencies on the long haul, the transoceanic moves, and then the shorter distance moves out of those transshipment ports into end markets. Most significantly, those serve typically the smaller markets. I don't think you would transship logically into LA Long Beach as a shipper. You're going to come up here. But as far as the use of the Panama Canal, part of that transshipment advantage already exists in terms of use of the railroad in Panama, which we haven't mentioned previously, but they rebuilt the railroad a few years ago, and the Kansas City Southern has been running a railroad back and forth across, including shuttling some containers, though perhaps not the volumes they would have desired to have. But that transshipment allows service into some parts of of South America that are not as well directly served today as they could be in the future, especially as economies like Chile continue to grow in their size and importance in with world trade. And we've seen quite dramatic growth in trade between Asia, especially China, with South America in the last few years, which bodes well for the liner companies to capture some of that through a transshipment operation competing for it. And Panama's a logical place to put a transshipment in this hemisphere because you may be running other vessel services into Panama anyway. It's a logical connection point, which is what has justified and led to the success of that MIT terminal on the Atlantic side already.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We have a question on this side.
Good evening. My name is Brindley Lee. I'm here with the San Diego World Trade Center. I found the analysis and the in-depth data that was presented by the panel to be very informative, but I'm curious about the lack of inclusion in any of the data about the role of the export markets in all of this. And I'd like the panel to maybe comment on that. And surely this is not just a one-way road. There has to be some impact that the U.S. and North American exports are going to play in this decision.
Mary, do you want to start with that?
In the U.S. market, exports are the backhaul cargo, I guess you could say. You've had the whole structure of the network has been driven by imports. So I think that's why we tend to talk about the imports in this market. But certainly over the last year and a half, exports have rebounded for the U.S. and taken up a greater share. Usually decisions are made based on whatever your heaviest cargo is, and in terms of volume. So I know that for my own home port of Halifax, everything is driven by the exports. Exports is the big part of our trade.
Todd or Paul, anything to add?
I think at the current export volumes, any export that wants to transit the Panama Canal currently can do so.
Let me jump in. I think there's some real potential for the Panamanians to capture some additional export cargo out of the United States. And if you think about if we move away from the liner cargoes into the bulk cargoes, that's a real constraint today in terms of the size of a dry bulk vessel and the size of the shipments you can have, say, out of the ports of South Louisiana, biggest tonnage port in the whole hemisphere. And the ability for U.S. ag exporters to ship more cheaply into Asia out the Mississippi River system just through the use of larger vessels is a real attraction to them. As far as the revenues back to the Canal Authority, it's not so significant. They're not going to get as much money as they're going to get out of the large container ships. But as far as an element of traffic and importance to the country, it's not insignificant. And one other unrelated or separate factor that is related to exports is that a long-term forecast is that the U.S. exports actually become more or less out of balance than they've been in the last few decades. The U.S. can't sustain the kind of trade deficit we've been running for decades, and one of the adjustment factors is the exchange rate. But also, it's because the markets in which we're selling exports are growing faster than our own market is growing to draw in imports. So if we go out enough decades, at least if we're competitive as an export nation, and we are for such things as agricultural products, it's very likely that our exports, the tonnages of those and the volumes are going to increase faster than some of the imports, and some of that cargo is going to be able to take advantage of the larger locks through the canal.
Thank you. Question over here.
Hello, my name is Dr. Juan Españez, Professor of International Business, National University San Diego. And my question is the following. In your presentations, it seems you assumed an interrupted trend of cargo flows as we have them today, just extrapolate into the future. I would suggest that you take into account the major changes in sourcing, outsourcing that are taking place, shaping into the future as a major force. I think we will see a move away from far shoring, meaning buying from China all this, the Walmart type of stuff, into at least a near-shoring approach, sourcing from places, sites nearby, Mexico, Central America, you have not mentioned that. And that will determine, the volume of cargo and the origin of that cargo. I would suggest that you would really you should really integrate that into your analysis, because just assuming, well, China's importance will decline as a source of imports to the U.S. for the reasons that you just mentioned. One of them, the exchange rate appreciating. The U.S. wants to see that happening. The labor costs in China are growing also, and productivity is not increasing. The three factors that increase the price of imports are changing. So I would just simply suggest that you include that in your projections. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone want to comment, expound upon that? Todd?
I'll just throw a comment that's being circulated within our company. One of the things we're seeing is the expansion west in China. So when you look at the future of China and think that it's going to price itself out of the market, they are currently outsourcing their own manufacturing that was formerly on the eastern coast to areas such as Chongqing. And if you don't know, if you've never heard of Chongqing, it's a tiny little city of 30 million in the middle of China, up the Yangtze River. So that was the primary focus of finishing the Three Gorges Dam, so they could move and transport goods up and down that river. So China's not done yet from our perspective. They have most of their population on the interior, and they are looking to outsource their own manufacturing that is being done on our behalf to the interior of their country. So China's going to be with us for quite some time.
Mm-hmm. Good. Do we have a question on this side?
Yeah, my name is Greg Mitri. I'm with the ILW also. And my question is kind of directed from the last speaker. Todd touched on Vietnam, and we all know 2016 is about 5-6 years away when the canal will be done. I'm wondering if there's any thoughts from Mary or Paul regarding what the major markets will be in 2016 and where the major imports will be coming from, and what emerging markets you see being the major players that are going to be importing goods to the West Coast and the rest of the United States.
Thank you. Mary, do you want to start?
Well, there's been a fair investigation of where the growth potential is from the Canadian perspective. And we see that North American imports are going to grow from places like Vietnam, India over not the next 10 years, but certainly the next 20. We see the possibility, as was previously noted, for growth from Africa. We certainly support, Paul had talked about the growth of South America as a new source. So it's not just about China. And so there is trade patterns are very dynamic. And I'm not sure that the Panama Canal is necessarily going to change the game of where the population is growing, where the imports are coming from, where the exports are going to. There are many factors at play. The Panama Canal is only one. I think there's another game changer here, and that is marine fuel prices. You know, if we impose sulfur emission control areas everywhere, where does the sulfur-reduced fuel come from? Nobody's figured that out yet. The refineries just want to sell sludge. So, you know, we've got a number of other game changers in addition to the Panama Canal, and my crystal ball's a little cloudy, so I'm not sure I can answer that question that well.
I think the question of 2016 or 5 years or even 10 years from now in terms of the trade partner shares, it'll reflect more of what we see today in terms of the regional mix, though there are going to continue to be these shifts that we've been talking about. You know, if it's down at the individual decision maker level, if I'm an apparel maker, I'm going to chase that lowest labor cost manufacturing, whether it's Vietnam or whether it's Cambodia or whether it's someplace in Southern Africa. But there are also some infrastructure decisions that have been made where trade relationships are a little stickier. If you just put a plant in, say, 3 years ago in China, depending upon what's in that plant and what the investment is, you know, that may take you a few more years to try to shift. Just as on this side of the trade, you know, distribution patterns take some time to happen. If you've got a 10-year lease on a warehouse distribution center, you may not want to move out of that very quickly. But over time, those shifts happen, and the 100-year perspective is maybe the one the Panamanians have, since they've had their canal coming up on 100 years, where it really is investment of that water infrastructure that lasts for decades and decades. But that trade will likely to continue to shift. My point, and I don't know how clearly I made it, was that the size and the enormity and what is still there as growth potential in Asia for this near to midterm is still probably going to be dominant for U.S. trade. Todd's point about investments to reach inland in China, they have made an enormous investment in infrastructure that dwarfs what we've been making in the United States in the last decade in hard transportation infrastructure, building out thousands and thousands of miles of highway system and very advanced state-of-the-art rail systems to reach into their own hinterland to enable that trade relationship that's existed in those coastal provinces to reach some of those hundreds of millions of their population that have not been engaged in trade industries, trade manufacturing jobs before.
I have an easy question on the card for Todd. Todd, do you think that the expansion of the Panama Canal in conjunction with a push for a trucker employee mandate will cause beneficial cargo owners to move cargo away from Southern California?
Wow, I said it was easy. That's a sticky question there. I guess I would answer it that the beneficial cargo owners are always concerned with every fee that they have to pay. So if anything results in them having to pay more as they come through LA Long Beach, they're concerned. Doesn't mean that they will find it beneficial to move their discretionary cargo to another facility where they may have to invest in a distribution building, reestablish themselves in another state. I don't know. But they are always concerned, and that's always the pushback. That's always the challenge for my company is when additional fees come up, whether it's on the airline side or the ocean side. It's a difficult conversation, and no one wants to pay more, that's for sure.
Anyone want to add anything? No?
I think Todd said it all. Companies don't want to pay an extra charge, and every time you add an extra charge on, that gap between LA, Long Beach, and Vancouver shifts again. And so eventually that might be just enough to tip it over the balance. So you have to be very careful about putting charges on, because somebody will say, well, this isn't right now, but maybe I need to rethink how my system works, and I'll restructure it for next year. So, you might put it in place, but then a year from now, somebody's made a decision to change the way they do business. So it's been tipped.
Carolyn?
You're actually talking about what my customers have sent me up here to ask about, and that's the growing cost that they're experiencing coming through this port. Their transportation costs, just getting across the docks. Reliability was an issue a few years ago. That's improved. We've all put in we've all invested heavily in our terminals to improve our own efficiencies. But they're very much concerned with the rising cost just to come in this port complex, and they don't see any end to it. And they were hoping that you'd be able to do some comparison with what it will cost going through the canal versus what we're paying today. And actually, as it looks like people want to continue to tax our containers as they come across. All three of you could answer if you like.
I'm going to defer that one.
Paul, do you want to take
I'm not sure entirely how to respond to that question, except that it's clearly the case that in the port industry of the United States, there is some reason for leadership in terms of the community, and we've seen oftentimes other ports essentially looking to the San Pedro Bay ports for cover. We've seen that in Puget Sound, where they've been waiting for something to happen down here, and then they have cover to say, well, LA Long Beach has already done it, so we can too. I think that extends to assessing fees associated with port cargo, and we've seen signs of that, or exploratory, somebody putting up a trial balloon to say, should we do it too? I've heard discussions about that within some of the port management at other ports in the Eastern Gulf Coast, that, well, maybe in the future they can do that to help support their needs for infrastructure or environmental compliance or on, and we can We can see it at the federal level when they talk about policies around how do you come up with supporting infrastructure that's needed for ports. There's a lot of people that are looking potentially to try to extract a little bit more out of ports other than the San Pedro Bay ports in terms of getting some rent out of that cargo. But as Mary says, you know, it's not just the U.S. ports here that are competing. It's also the Canadian ports, and there's alternatives. And understanding the whole hemisphere in terms of feeding this continent as the right context is what's important to understand the impacts of those fees. And as Mary said, it's really the sum total of those and the final perception on the part of the shippers that's going to matter.
There are a fair number of studies that have been done by PhD students and master's students trying to evaluate the total logistics costs of moving cargo. And they pick a route and they add the inventory carrying costs and cycle costs and them all up, and they always end up with, well, maybe if someone imposed an extra $125 on a box at a port, is it going to be enough to tip it over? Well, it depends, and it all goes back to the value of the cargo and the time value of money. And some cargoes can bear it, and it doesn't make a bit of difference. In other cargoes, it's enough to drive them away. So every cargo interest has to assess their own position, and so, you know, you can do the studies and you can make the recommendation how much you're going to win versus how much you're going to lose.
I also think that there's enough West Coast competition to put that to the test. If the fees and the cost coming through LA Long Beach become so excessive, there are the Oakland and Seattle Tacoma options. So
here's the Prince Rupert option.
We'll take that offline.
We just want to keep it here.
Question to my right.
My name is Michael. I'm a casual longshoreman as well as a writer, just burgeoning. But this has to do with a lot of different agencies, and a 50-year arm, I guess, would be the best way of explaining it. It has to do with the National Nuclear Security Agency and the NEST organization, Nuclear Emergency Strike Teams that guard our ports. It's an equation where if we add more ports, does that add more jobs that are needed by certain intelligence community personnel? Does that add to their workload? And is that something that you guys are looking into in the equation, as well as when our train lines move from their current state, where steel on steel, rather than moving into a magnetic levitation, which Obama had talked about? That's going to be part of the structure of reconstruction of this country in relationship to, I guess, our infrastructure. But I guess that would be Austin Goolsby's territory. But it has to do with when we're going to institute magnetic levitation into the railways, which is possible now, as you guys know, but also for preparation for the superconductive paradigm shift. Because a friend of mine actually went to school here at Cal State Long Beach for his master's and got it in Cooper pairing, which has to do with superconductivity. So there's a lot of people working on that equation, and that paradigm shift hopefully will happen in our lifetime so that we can feed the world, so to speak.
Anyone feel qualified to address that?
I'll take that on. I think there's some real potential for new technologies in the more distant future to make ports more efficient, especially as some of the technology costs fall over time. I think we're way ahead in terms of the physical and engineering potential to implement things than we are in terms of coming up with the funding to pay for any of it. I mean, that's really the obstacle today. It's not that we don't have the scientists and the engineers to be, or the construction capabilities to build this. It's that we don't have the ability to come up with a funding equation that works to get it constructed and operating. And I think that's really going to remain a challenge as we see both pressures on the public sector and on the private sector to come up with adequate capital to make the leap into new technologies to improve productivity. On your first question on the security dispersal issue, I think that's a relevant one in terms of the federal government. government that wants to, from just a purely security perspective, would like to concentrate the points of entry into the country, because then obviously they can focus more clearly on what those risks are that are carried through the cargo on trying to enter the country. There's a balance, though, obviously, where they've said very clearly, I think both the Obama administration and prior administration said they don't want to impede commerce through these decisions about how to manage security. And there's a balancing act, obviously, that's at work, but it's also money in the end. It's how much are we willing to spend as a society to make sure that the risks are minimized, not just to the dock workers, but to the country as a whole from security risks that come through the goods entering the ports.
Well, I guess,
thank you.
Just
I'm going to ask, just because I know we have, in the interest of time, I want to give the last two gentlemen up here time to ask their questions. So let me go here. First to you,
Hi,
sir.
I'm Dick McKenna with the Marine Exchange of Southern California. And given your projections of international trade growth, doesn't everybody win? I.e., there seems to be plenty of room for the capacity. A couple of years ago, we were talking about triple the growth in LA in the next 10, 20 years or so. And of course, we couldn't possibly handle that in the first place. But the fact that cargo is going to expand into the Gulf and into the East Coast and everywhere else, I don't think should worry us too terribly much. We do have the infrastructure. All of that growth has to go somewhere and not necessarily leaving our port.
Yeah, Captain McKenna, that's a great question, and I think you raise a very good point. A lot of our discussions up here across the panel and our prepared presentations about market share. But if we look back at the history of San Pedro Bay ports, the only time we actually saw an absolute drop in cargo before the recession, which affected everybody, was after that congestion in 2004, 2005. We've had loss of market share here a little bit already to the East Coast while volumes kept increasing. So that's actually the right perspective to have. Trade in our forecast is such that it continues to grow, as I showed, faster than the economy as a whole. Volumes continue to increase. So there's actually, as Mary said, it's your cargo to lose. Well, really, in a way, it's your market share to lose. You can still lose market share and still have to handle more cargo. And that can happen for many, many, many years, such that we still run up against capacity constraints, even as the market share might fall. So some of this risk that's there is only centered around discussing market share. But in terms of the absolute volumes that have to be handled and the jobs and this physical space and the throughput capacity we have, it'll still have to increase even if there's some loss of market share here.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, we are saying it's a share to lose, but the volumes are expected to grow. And remember, the volumes are related to world population, and they are related to the maturing of emerging markets and being able to meet their desires to be wealthier and to have a better life. And so we're going to see trade continue to grow at a phenomenal level. And so if you have a declining market share, but the volume is still going up, you shouldn't be worried.
Last question to Rich Dines.
Thank you. Rich Dines. I'm a member of the CITT Policy and Steering Committee and a proud member of ILW Local 13. I wanted to recognize Representative Laura Richardson, who was here tonight, because of her efforts in securing funding to build the new Gerald Desmond Bridge, which is a $1 billion infrastructure improvement project, which will address two of the problems that we have here in LA and Long Beach, which are capacity and congestion. That being said, the ports are also investing an amount of money in improving the ports as much as the cost of the Panama Canal itself. So we're going to be spending $5 billion here, just like they are there. And LA and Long Beach didn't become the biggest and the best overnight. So my question leading is, will the East and Gulf Coast ports be ready when the Panama Canal opens with dredging to take on the 8,000 to 12,000 TEU ships? And will they have capacity issues in their near future when they do take it on? And finally, Albert Einstein said, with every difficulty lies opportunity. Will LA and Long Beach be able to capture cargo ships from emerging markets like Brazil coming west, not only ships going east? Thank you.
Thanks. And I'd like to, and this will be our opportunity for each of the panelists to give some closing remarks as they answer that question. So why don't we'll start with Paul and work our way through Mary and then Todd.
Thank you, Rich. A very good question. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity here, clearly, and your points about the investments being made here in infrastructure and the terminals to continue to handle the planned projected increases in cargo volumes are absolutely right. You're building from strength. The investments are here. I know the community tries very hard to work through all the issues around stakeholders to come up with the funding, the investments, the permitting, the compliance, environmental issues, and all the other challenges. But this is a pretty advanced community. You've been at this a long time. You've had some success. You've had some breakthroughs with some EIS approvals for some further terminal expansion. Getting the funding on the Gerald Desmond Bridge replacement is a big milestone. I think the industry recognizes that, and in fact, my perception from the Beltway view on the East Coast is that, San Pedro Bay has responded in the past decade to some of the challenges that were there earlier in the part of the last decade, and that has really stepped up. Now, in some respects, it's been advantaged by the fact that you've had a recession, which has hurt jobs and income here, but it's also given you some breathing room to catch up in terms of capacity needs. And planning has proceeded. The investments have proceeded. It's clearly that the community didn't give up. We've heard that from port management and others in the community that in the recession they weren't stopping going forwards with the planning necessary to handle growth and trade. And I think there's some other ports in the country that really lost some time in the recession because they weren't able to advance some of the plans that they need to be able to have capacity to try to compete for canal traffic if it would come to them. And some of those impediments are very real and are not going to be easy or cheap to fix. And in some cases, the politics are much more in their infancy in the East Coast in terms of those communities working together to solve the problems that this community has already worked through and is much further down the road in terms of being able to come up with solutions to the problems.
Thanks. Mary?
Well, I think the economic recession has given most ports in the U.S. and Canada the opportunity to take stock of what markets they want to compete in and how they want to compete and what problems they have in dealing with congestion or understanding their capacity. Most ports have capacity now. And so for the short-term future, most are seeing that this gives them the chance to make the best use of the capacity they have and to fight for market share. But ultimately, over the longer term, there will have to be more port investments made. And the port that I think is probably best positioned on the East Coast is Norfolk. I know that all up and down the eastern seaboard, most of the ports are extremely worried about how much business Norfolk is going to take from everybody else. And the Heartland Corridor investment has the potential to really to catapult Norfolk up to the next level. And I think the ports out there are quite concerned about it. To answer the last thought, Brazil is an emerging market that has every potential of going from strength to strength to strength over the next while, and I expect that the Panama Canal will mean that Brazil's trade with the West Coast should strengthen.
Thanks. And the last word to Todd.
I think the answer is yes, they'll be ready. But the question is, who will win anyways? If you look at the West Coast, there's there's LA, there's San Francisco, Oakland, there's Portland to a certain extent, Seattle, Tacoma, but LA Long Beach has the largest share by far. So to Mary's point, some of them are already ready now as far as the ability to service the ships. Others are making investments. And as I said in my presentation, every port along the Gulf Coast and the East Coast has a memorandum of understanding. So I think what we're going to find is there's going to be some investments made in vain because out of the entire Gulf Coast and East Coast ports, there's going to be losers within their own group. Right, so similar to the West Coast, LA dominates. There's going to be a winner on the East and Gulf Coast ports, probably Norfolk, and my bet is on Houston. And they will dominate the share that goes there. The steamship lines, when they're deployed, the 8,000, 10,000, 12,000, if it even happens going through the Panama Canal, they can't stop at every port. They're going to have to choose which ones are going to make the most sense for them.
Please join me in thanking our panelists. There were a couple of questions we didn't get to answer. We'll do our best to incorporate them in the write-up of the proceedings of this event. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Genevieve Giuliano, the director of the MetTrans Transportation Center, to help tie things together for us.
Thank you. This has been an absolutely incredible event as far as I'm concerned. This has been an amazing set of presentations. I'm supposed to be famous for being able to wrap things up, and this is a real challenge tonight, so we'll see what happens. I'm going to go through the who, what, when, where as my interpretation of what we heard tonight. And so I'm going to start with what matters. And what I heard is what matters is where the business is, and that means where the population is, because the population is ultimately the consumers, right? And so the geography of the United States and where that population is important. The other thing that matters is where are the most efficient producers in a time cost sensitive market. Okay, so it's really where is the most efficient production plus supply chain. And that includes, of course, transportation links. And then the other thing that matters that I heard is how these patterns may change over time. And towards the end, we even heard about what if, for example, Africa becomes the next kind of China in terms of cheap production market. The next question is, where is the battle? We all talked about what this battle was about. The battle is in the Midwest United States. We're all fighting for the middle of the United States. And again, the big factor is time and money. What we have today is very efficient velocity. From the point of view of the goods owner, a good should never sit still. So to the extent that the route can provide velocity where the product never stops until it's in the hands of the consumer, that's where the battle is going to be. How is the battle going to be fought? Well, it's going to be fought in terms of who has that cheapest routing in terms of time and dollars, who has the best reliability, and therefore who has the resources and the infrastructure. Then the next question is, who are the actors? That is to say, who's going to make the decisions as this competitive environment moves forward? We heard very clearly over and over again that the cargo owner chooses, but I'm actually asking the question of who is it that's going to try to influence the cargo owner's choices. One of the things I was actually surprised about tonight is that so little was said about the role of government. And it seems to me that federal, state, and local government in the United States is tremendously important in terms of influencing cargo owner decisions. At the state and federal level, I think the federal level is actually becoming more important, mostly because state representatives are more and more successful in influencing federal government investment. You heard just at the very end here a mention of the Heartland Corridor in Norfolk, Virginia. It is no accident that Norfolk is an emerging competitor on the East Coast. They have connected with federal dollars to help them make that competitive case. The next group are the railroads. None of these very high volume port routes could actually exist and be competitive without efficiency in the railroad system. So clearly there's a really big role there. And then there's intermodal. There's DC and warehousing capacity and on and on. So we have a large number of actors who are going to be making decisions that are going to influence outcomes. Some of the key observations that I took from this is, first of all, the sense of intensity of competition across these routes. And if competition is intense, what it means is that very small changes in relative time costs are going to matter a lot, because the battle is going to be essentially on the margin at the last couple of containers, the last bit of business, okay? At the same time, there's a great deal of flexibility in supply and logistics systems. And that means there's actually a lot of uncertainty when we try to actually predict about how these decisions are what decisions specific actors are actually going to make. So that means this is really unpredictable, at least in my book. There's also the wild cards, big shifts in trade patterns, big shifts in transportation costs, What if there really is a great effort on carbon taxes or some other regulatory means for reducing greenhouse gases? What if there is a breakthrough technology that dramatically changes costs across the supply chain in some way? All of those things could easily happen, but we have no way of really predicting what they might be. The bottom line that I came back with tonight is that a lot depends on the way that ports and their actors along the supply chain actually make decisions to compete. So I agree with Mary that it's really our choice, the people here tonight, and the market share and the eventual productivity of Southern California ports is really going to depend on the actors here today, the supply chain interests today, and how they cooperate and collaborate. Thank you. And are you adjourned? Are you going to adjourn? Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Giuliano, for an amazing summary. She puts me to awe every time I see her sitting there writing notes and come up with the summary. Quite amazing. Thank you again for doing that. There's only a few things left for me to say, and one is that the proceedings of tonight's event are captured in a report, and that report is going to be available online. You can also go online and find out how you can purchase a copy of the video. It has been an honor, ladies and gentlemen, to chair this inaugural event of our Point Counterpoint. I would like you to pull out the green evaluation, fill it out, give us feedback, and tell us what kind of topics you would like us to tackle the next time. It's very important that I express my gratitude to a number of people who do an amazing job in the background. Many of you have been talking with Alex Traver. She is the person behind it. Yes, a round of applause. Together with her assistant, Diane Delaterre, Angeli Logan, Robin Seals, they have been helping all along. I would like to thank again our sponsors who, together with the MedTrans Fund, through the Department of Transportation and through Caltrans, helped us sponsor this event. It's the Port of Long Beach, the Port of Los Angeles, the ILWU, Local 13, 6494, the SCDC, BNSF, ACTA, the Long Beach City College, the International Trade Office, the Panama Canal Authority, the Harbor Transportation Club, Sea Grant, and the Long Beach Business Journal. They deserve a round of applause, right? Thank you goes to our trade association who have been endorsing our event. And one more time, a big thank you to Mary, to Paul, to Todd, to Tom O'Brien, not only for doing a great job in moderating this panel, but also for putting the timeline together in your program, and he's going to be responsible for the final report. Jen Giuliano included. A round of applause one more time for those people. And before I conclude, I have to say thank you, Rich Steins, for your fantastic outreach. You brought them all in. This concludes tonight's event. Thank you again for coming, and I hope I see you next year. Thank you. Good night.